You don't know exactly when it began. Perhaps it was that day you turned off your alarm and decided not to get up. Or maybe when you ignored that call for help. Or it could have been much earlier, so subtle that you didn't even notice. A small deviation, a whispered justification. You look in the mirror every morning convinced you know yourself, that you understand your limits. But monsters don't always have fangs or claws. Sometimes they just have your tired eyes looking back at you. Have you ever wondered how many steps separate a good person from becoming what they swore to fight against? They're not miles. They're not years. Sometimes they're seconds, split-second decisions, moments of pressure where the moral compass becomes disoriented and you no longer recognize north. You didn't need to build concentration camps to understand this. You feel it when you resign yourself to injustice for comfort, when you look the other way, when silence seems safer than truth. The transformation doesn't happen suddenly. It's gradual, like boiling water that rises in temperature, 1 degree at a time. The frog doesn't jump because it doesn't perceive the change. Neither do you notice when your morality begins to negotiate with itself. Philip Zimbardo demonstrated this in the Stanford Prison Experiment. Ordinary students, normal young people, randomly divided, guards and prisoners. It took just 6 days for the guards to develop cruel behaviors. It wasn't monsters who entered the experiment. It was people like you. The line between good and evil isn't an impenetrable wall. It's a porous membrane, permeable, and you cross it more often than you dare to acknowledge. Stanley Milgram wanted to understand why so many Germans obeyed atrocious orders during the Holocaust. His experiment revealed that 65% of ordinary people were willing to administer potentially lethal electric shocks to another human being, simply because an authority figure told them to continue. You shudder to think that you wouldn't be one of them. But statistics don't lie. You probably would be. Context shapes you more than you believe. The group pulls you more than you admit. Social pressure is a river that erodes your will until it becomes unrecognizable. One day you passionately defend a value, and the next you sacrifice it for belonging. To avoid being left alone. To avoid being singled out. Albert Bandura called it moral disengagement. That mechanism that allows you to harm without feeling guilt. You activate it when you dehumanize others, when you label them, when you dilute your responsibility in the collective. Everyone does it. I was just following instructions. It wasn't me. It was the system. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned, whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you. That abyss lives within you. It watches you. It waits patiently for the right circumstances to emerge. You don't need hatred to cause harm. Indifference is enough. Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor, expressed it with devastating clarity. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. How many times have you walked by? How many times have you shrugged your shoulders? How many times has silence been your response to injustice? Monsters aren't needed for evil to thrive, just good people who do nothing. The real-world experiment is happening right now. In your daily decisions, in your small moral abdications, in the times you said, just this once, in the exceptions that became the rule. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow. that dark part we all carry within. Not recognizing it doesn't make it disappear. It makes it more dangerous, more uncontrollable. Concentration camps weren't built in a day. Great atrocities begin with small compromises, with lines that are crossed, with values that are negotiated. Martha Nussbaum, contemporary philosopher, points out that evil doesn't require monsters. It only requires that normal people become blind to the humanity of others. You've become blind sometimes, haven't you? You've stopped seeing people and have begun to see obstacles, competitors, enemies. You've drawn invisible lines between us and them. Simone de Beauvoir wrote about the ambiguity of the human condition, that perpetual tension between our freedom and our circumstances, between what we could be and what we are, between our ideals and our actions. There isn't a single decision that transforms you into a monster. It's the accumulation, the compound effect of small surrenders, of moments when you weren't the person you thought you were. Social psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated that you will yield to group pressure even when the evidence before your eyes says otherwise. You will deny the truth for conformity. You will sacrifice your judgment for acceptance. How many times have you already done it? How many times have you betrayed your inner certainty for the comfort of consensus? You don't need to be evil to cause harm. The most devastating harm is caused by people convinced they're doing the right thing. People who justify their actions in the name of some greater good, some noble cause. Jonathan Haidt and his theory of the rider and the elephant reveals this uncomfortable truth. Your reason is primarily a defense attorney for your impulses and emotions. You manufacture elaborate justifications for decisions you've already made, for reasons you don't even understand. The path toward darkness isn't marked with warning signs. There are no billboards saying, "Here begins your fall." There are only moments of pressure, exceptional circumstances that normalize the unthinkable. Psychologist Robert Cialdini identified our vulnerabilities: reciprocity, commitment, social proof, authority, liking, scarcity, invisible levers that others can use to manipulate your behavior, to gradually push you toward moral territories you never thought you'd inhabit. Zygmunt Bauman spoke of liquid modernity, where nothing maintains its form, not even your moral convictions. They adapt to the container that holds them, to the context that pressures them. You don't need to be a monster to behave like one. You just need sufficient justifications. You need emotional distance. You need the illusion that your actions have no real consequences. Viktor Frankl, concentration camp survivor, observed in the confines of horror that even there, inner freedom existed. The capacity to choose one's own attitude in any circumstance. The inalienable responsibility for one's own behavior. You don't have total control over what happens to you, but you always have the final word on how you respond. Arendt also noted that thinking itself arises out of the incidents of living experience and must remain bound to them as the only guideposts by which to take its bearings. It's your capacity for critical reflection, for questioning your own actions, that can save you. The transformation into a monster occurs precisely when you stop asking yourself if what you're doing is right. When self-criticism shuts down. When justification replaces reflection. Social psychologist James Waller studied perpetrators of genocides. He discovered they weren't psychopaths. They were ordinary people who had gradually disconnected from their empathy, who had normalized cruelty step by step. You've also become desensitized. With each image of suffering, you ignore. With each injustice, you normalize. With each problem you decide is not your business. Pure monsters don't exist. They're only people who choose, decision after decision, to distance themselves from their humanity, who allow circumstances to erode their values, who confuse adaptation with surrender. Christopher Browning studied ordinary German policemen who became executioners during the Holocaust. His conclusion should shake you. It wasn't hatred that moved them. It was group pressure, the desire not to disappoint their comrades, to not appear weak. How much weight can your integrity bear before it breaks? How much pressure can your morals withstand before yielding? The answer isn't comforting, less than you think. Philosopher Immanuel Kant proposed a categorical imperative. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. An impossible standard for imperfect beings like us, and yet necessary. Iris Murdoch wrote that art and morals are one and the same thing. Both consist of learning to see, to truly see the other, to see beyond our projections, our fears, our defenses. Each time you choose not to see, you move one step further from your humanity. Each time you reduce someone to a category, to a stereotype, to an abstraction, you feed the potential monster that lives within you. Martha Nussbaum speaks of the central capabilities that make a human life worthy. Among them is affiliation, being able to live with and toward others, to recognize and show concern for other human beings. The monster is born when that capability atrophies, when the other ceases to matter, when their suffering becomes tolerable or even necessary for your ends. Milgram's experiments revealed something else. Resistance existed. A minority refused to follow orders, refused to inflict harm, even under intense social and authoritarian pressure. What distinguished this minority? Not their declared values, not their education, not their personality, but their ability to recognize the critical moment, to perceive the line they weren't willing to cross. Do you know your lines? Have you thought about them before the moment comes to defend them? Philosopher Seneca warned, "If one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable." Without a conscious moral compass, you'll drift toward territories you never planned to visit. You'll become someone you don't recognize, decision after decision. Václav Havel, playwright and political dissident, wrote about the power of the powerless, how small acts of integrity, even under oppressive systems, preserve humanity, how refusing to live the lie is the first step to dismantling it. Your resistance matters. Your small acts of courage matter, even when they seem insignificant. Especially then. Simone Weil wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Paying true attention to the other, to their irreducible humanity, is the antidote to the transformation into a monster. You've been distracted. You've looked without seeing. You've listened without hearing. You've been present without really being there. And in those absences, in those empty spaces, the monster finds its home. Emmanuel Levinas placed ethics before ontology, the face of the other as the first reality. as a call to responsibility that precedes even thought. "The face speaks," he wrote. "It tells you, 'You shall not kill me.'" But what happens when you stop seeing faces? When you see statistics, groups, anonymous masses? When physical or psychological distance allows you to ignore that primordial call? Paul Ricoeur spoke of narrative as constitutive of identity. The story you tell yourself determines who you believe you are and who you believe you can become. What story are you telling yourself? Have you become the infallible hero of your own narrative? Have you justified each moral deviation as necessary, as an exception, as understandable given the circumstances? The experiment continues every day, in every choice. There are no neutral observers documenting your responses, no researchers measuring your reactions. There is only the silent record of your conscience, and sometimes the invisible consequences of your actions or omissions. Albert Camus wrote that, "In the midst of winter, I finally learned that there was in me an invincible summer." That capacity to be reborn is always present. The possibility of reconnecting with your humanity never completely disappears. No matter how many steps you've taken in the wrong direction, you can always stop. You can always look at the map again. You can always reorient your compass. There is no fixed destiny. There is no moral determinism that condemns you to darkness. There is only constant vigilance, sustained attention. The decision renewed each day to remain human in a world that sometimes seems to reward the opposite. Recognizing your shadow doesn't mean surrendering to it. It means integrating it, making it conscious so it doesn't direct your actions from the darkness. The true monster is not one who makes mistakes. It's one who refuses to recognize them, who justifies them until they can no longer distinguish between good and evil, between what is just and what is convenient, between truth and comfortable lies. You've strayed from the path sometimes. You've stumbled. You've yielded. We all have. The question isn't whether you'll fall again. You will. The question is whether you'll have the courage to rise, to recognize the deviation, to return, wounded but wiser, to your best self. Because transformation works in both directions. The same capacity that allows you to distance yourself from your humanity can bring you back to it. More conscious, more compassionate, more attentive to the small warning signs. If this inner journey has stirred something in you, let me know in the comments which line resonated most deeply with you. What uncomfortable truth you've recognized, what reflection you intend to carry with you. Subscribe for more explorations of our complex humanity, for more uncomfortable but necessary conversations, for more truths that help us remain human in times that seem to reward the opposite. And remember, the most dangerous monster is not the one that roars in the darkness. It's the one that whispers excuses in your ear while looking at you from the mirror.